Well, we are honored to have heard from three candidates for governor. It says something about this gathering that they would take time from their very, very busy schedules to join us today, and it's very much appreciated that you were here. We are also blessed and honored to have a gentleman who went through exactly the travails that these three are now going through and was successful in being elected governor of New Jersey. And I don't need to spend a lot of time to introduce Governor Florio, but I will say this. His passion for the state and for seeing it take the right course is reflected in so many of his activities, including his support of New Jersey policy perspective in many, many ways. In fact, it was Governor Florio who launched our report on the notorious 9 decisions that put New Jersey in the hole in the first place. And I thought it would be very helpful to have a point of view from his experience to put the ambition to be governor in a context of what you can learn from having been governor. And with that, I would like to introduce Governor Jim Florio.
Well, thank you and good afternoon. When Gordon first approached me about doing this, I was a little apprehensive because my last experience giving advice to governors was not so successful. And this is a real story, by the way. About 5 or 6 weeks after Governor Christie got elected, he called me at my home on a Saturday morning. I got a call on my cell phone. He introduced himself. I really didn't know him that well. Introduced himself and said he was calling to get some advice from a governor whom he respected, as he put it. I said, well, I'm not really into giving too much advice, but the only thing I would suggest is that when I was in office, I tried to give my opponents some option other than killing me. And he said very clearly, that's not my style. And he was obviously correct. But I am interested in following this election, which is very important for all of us. And my observation that I'd share with you is that we have to have someone in a position of authority as governor of New Jersey with the intellect to understand the magnitude of the problems, the uniqueness of the problems that that person is going to be facing. And also to have the sensitivity to understand that these are unique times. Change is always a constant, but there are times such as these where change is extraordinary. Change is rapid, change that we're facing is dramatic, and change that we're facing is very complex. What we're doing is trying to cope with this rapid change, and we're not coping with it very effectively. The change is occurring so rapidly that it's outpacing our ability to formulate policies designed to cope with the ramifications and the implications of the changes. So we're perpetually behind the curve. We're applying old answers, old policies to new problems, and they're not working. It's like going to the toolkit and picking out the wrong tool. It's not going to work. You're going to be frustrated. You're going to be very unhappy. I mean, just to give you an example, the one I can think of is the Great Recession of 2008. We should not have been surprised about what happened. We were applying policies, even institutions that were created in the 1930s, in the Depression. They didn't know anything about credit default swaps, interest rate swaps, other types of exotic derivative products. We should not have been surprised then that it didn't work very well. As I say, you pick the sector: telecommunications, health, financial services. We're going through not incremental change, We're not going through marginal change. We're going through systemic change, transformational change. And to do that, to cope with that new type of radical change, we have to formulate new frameworks within which we can understand the trends that are taking place, the forces at work that are causing these changes that we now have to cope with. That's the mission. Something that we have to be doing, and we're not focusing on that. You can't fix a problem if you don't understand the problem. There are no answers if you don't know what the questions are. That's why forums such as this and organizations such as this are extremely important. They help us to understand what we're coping with. And the last point I would make is that a very important character trait of the next governor, if they're to be successful, is what I call intellectual courage, the willingness to question traditional wisdom, which is more and more being about tradition and less about wisdom. We have to be willing to say what it is that's not working and what it is we really have to do to fix it. And this is not for the faint-hearted. Taking on the status quo is not for the faint-hearted. I can tell you that fairly authoritatively. What we have, there's always somebody out there, there's always an interest out there that's willing to defend the indefensible, objectively failing policies, usually because they're making money out of it. I mean, think tobacco, think coal, think gun violence. There's always somebody out there that will fight you tooth and nail, even when they're in the wrong and it's objectively verifiable. So what I'm suggesting to all of you is that there are certain thumb rules that have to be followed. One of the most important is that we have to make sure that citizens become engaged and informed. That's the way our system works. They have to become engaged because this is participatory democracy, is what we say, which is really a fancy way of saying the system doesn't work unless we all work at making it work. And people have to become informed because the problems are becoming more complex. What we need is not only a governor, but everybody else to be leaders, to try to bring people along to understand what it is that we have to cope with. Everybody in this room, by the way, is a leader. There are people that you influence. There are people that need to know what you know about the things that you're informed about. When I was congressman, particularly, I used to do town meetings. And I mean real town meetings, not rallies that come across as town meetings. And what I'd do is I'd have an audience of whatever, anywhere from 30 to 300 people in a town meeting. And what I'd try to do as objectively as possible, lay out the alternatives to whatever the problem was we were attempting to address. And I'd try to do that as objectively as possible, and then conclude by saying, my thought is, on balance, we should take this path. And then people would have at it. They'd digest it, they'd fight, and whatever, and we'd come to conclusions. That's really what we have to be doing. So I hope out of this whole session, we take a commitment to go out and be educators of sorts, talking to people to bring them together to try to formulate the consensus that's necessary for the orderly stability of our society. Let me end on an optimistic note. I'm fond of quoting Winston Churchill, who famously said with regard to public policy, the Americans always seem to get it right after they exhaust all the alternatives. So, thank you all very much.